kept adjusting, not because you're weak, but because deep down you believed that if you could just get the formula right, the softness, the strength, the timing, someone would finally stay. You've tried being honest. You've tried being distant. You've tried being everything between silence and confession, and no matter what version of you showed up, the outcome was always the same. She pulled away, and now you don't know what's real anymore. Was it you? Was it her? Was it the moment? Or was it something deeper? This video isn't about relationships. It's about the 7 versions of you that were never enough, because none of them were actually you. And the first mask you wore was the one she gave you, the one you lost everything for. He doesn't come back until the final section. Let's begin with the Mirrorwalker. Every man remembers the first time he was truly seen, or at least thought he was. It rarely starts with intimacy. It starts with projection, not hers, yours. Because long before you meet her gaze, you've already been practicing who you need to be. You may not know it consciously, but you've been preparing your posture, your tone, your demeanor for years, training to become recognizable to someone whose approval you mistake for love. She just happens to arrive at the right time. She sees something in you. She softens her voice, leans in slightly, treats your silence like it carries depth instead of doubt. And for a moment, that's enough. You believe you've been chosen, but you haven't. You've been imagined. She isn't falling in love with you. She's falling in love with a figure that vaguely resembles her inner masculine, the animus, as Jung called it, the composite of myth, memory, culture, and fantasy that every woman unconsciously constructs. And you match the outline. Not perfectly, but close enough. Close enough to awaken something in her. Close enough for her to believe you are him. And here's where the fracture begins. Because instead of noticing the mismatch, instead of recognizing her longing as her own, she projects it onto you. And instead of resisting it, you absorb it, because the idea of being truly seen is stronger than your sense of self. So you conform. You lean into her idea of who you could be, who you might be, who she needs you to be. Not out of manipulation, but because the part of you that's still unfinished wants to be authored by her approval. This is the birth of the Mirrorwalker, the man who exists primarily in reflection. He doesn't know who he is until a woman believes in him. He doesn't feel worthy until she mirrors value. And he doesn't realize how hollow that identity is until she pulls away. Because at first, her gaze is a high. It's spiritual, reverent. You've never felt this much faith directed at you, but it's not faith, it's fantasy. And fantasies don't survive reality. The Mirrorwalker's tragedy is that he believes this is connection, when in truth, it is rehearsal. She isn't loving him, she's rehearsing a figure that lived in her psyche long before he arrived. And he isn't showing up authentically. He's performing a role he was never cast for, but was desperate to fulfill. Why? Because most men are raised to outsource their reflection, to feel seen only in the eyes of a woman, to feel chosen only when desired, to feel like a man only when called one. This means that when a woman projects her unconscious onto him, the Mirrorwalker doesn't resist. He leans in, because her fantasy is more comforting than his confusion. And here's where the betrayal sets in. The more he leans into the role, the more she believes in the image. And the more she believes in the image, the higher the standard becomes. She expects stillness, stoicism, subtle leadership, and emotional stability, but not too much emotion, not too much softness. She wants you open, but not uncertain, strong but not rigid, masculine but malleable. What she's really asking for is a symbol, a living myth. And when you break character, when your humanity appears, the illusion collapses. At first, she doesn't realize why. She says things like, "I just don't feel it anymore," or "I need space," or "I thought I knew who you were." But what she's really saying is this: you are no longer animating the part of me I projected onto you. And this is what the Mirrorwalker never prepared for, because he believed the affection was for him. He thought the admiration was earned. He didn't realize he was only valuable so long as he kept the mask intact. And when the gaze disappears, he disappears with it. This is why the Mirrorwalker doesn't just feel rejected, he feels erased. The identity he adopted was not built from within. It was scaffolded by someone else's longing, and the moment her longing shifts, he collapses. This collapse isn't weakness. It's a psychic fracture. It's the realization that you've spent months, sometimes years, trying to become someone who never existed. Jung warned of this loop, the unconscious man projecting his hunger to be known onto the unconscious woman projecting her need for salvation. It isn't love. It's a closed circuit of projection and performance. And the Mirrorwalker is always the first to break, not because he's less grounded, but because he never started from ground at all. There's another betrayal hidden here. You betrayed yourself first, by abandoning your uncertainty in favor of being admired, by substituting presence with performance, by mistaking someone else's desire for a mirror of your identity. The Mirrorwalker doesn't vanish when love ends. He vanishes the moment the reflection fades, because he was never built from within. That's the cost of being seen before you've seen yourself. But not all men fear being unseen. Some fear being left behind, and they'll carry anything, her pain, her chaos, her weight, just to stop it from happening. That's the next archetype, the pleaser. He doesn't ask to be adored. He doesn't demand to be seen. He just wants to be useful, essential, needed in a way that makes him hard to leave. The pleaser isn't fueled by ego. He's fueled by fear, the fear that love by itself is too fragile to survive without constant effort, so he becomes the effort, always listening, always validating, always anticipating the next shift in tone, the next emotional withdrawal, the next subtle sign that he's falling short. He doesn't know what intimacy feels like unless he's working for it, and he doesn't know who he is unless he's being approved of in real time. But underneath that care, that attentiveness, that constant emotional attunement, there's a panic that never stops humming. Because the pleaser learned early on that love is conditional. He doesn't trust comfort, he doesn't trust consistency, and he definitely doesn't trust being wanted just because. So he makes himself irreplaceable, not by being whole, but by being helpful. The kind of helpful that absorbs emotional labor without boundary. The kind that says yes before being asked. The kind that flinches when told, "I need space," because space feels like failure. He believes that if she needs him, she won't leave. And he's right, for a while. But what the pleaser doesn't understand is that being needed isn't the same as being chosen. A woman might stay with a man who solves her pain, but eventually she'll resent the man who never asked her to hold his. And that's what makes the pleaser's identity so fragile. It's not rooted in self, it's rooted in strategy. He doesn't share his truth, he offers his understanding. He doesn't express desire, he defers to hers. He doesn't show boundaries, he showcases flexibility. And every part of him is shaped to avoid one outcome: abandonment. But here's the cruelty of it. In trying so hard to avoid being left, he ends up leaving himself first. And when that happens enough times, something cracks. Because she doesn't relax around him, she leans. She doesn't soften, she offloads. She doesn't trust, she uses. Not maliciously, but because she can feel, even if she can't name it, that he is more invested in not losing her than in actually being himself. And here's what no one teaches men like him. Being emotionally available is not the same as being emotionally grounded. You can open your heart, cry, listen, speak, but if it all comes from anxiety, it doesn't create closeness. It creates pressure. It turns you into a vessel, not a partner. She can sense it. She may not say it, but deep in her nervous system, she knows. This man isn't standing next to her. He's orbiting her, waiting to be rewarded with connection. And that's not intimacy, it's emotional servitude. The pleaser doesn't realize how exhausting he becomes. Not because he's kind, but because his kindness is a currency. He gives in hopes of being kept. He comforts in hopes of being chosen. He adapts in hopes of being safe. And slowly she pulls away. Not because she's cold, but because she's drowning in the very love he thinks will hold them together. She stops respecting him, not because he lacks emotion, but because his emotion has no spine beneath it. And when she does finally leave, the pleaser doesn't get angry. He doesn't protest. He internalizes, "I wasn't enough." But it wasn't that he wasn't enough. It was that he kept trying to be everything. And a man who tries to be everything becomes invisible. Not because he has no value, but because he has no edge. There's no clarity, no self, no presence that says, "Here is where I begin and end." That's what creates polarity. That's what creates respect. And the pleaser has none of it, because every line he draws is erased by the need to be okay in her eyes. Kierkegaard wrote that despair isn't just sadness, it's the refusal to become oneself. That's the pleaser's prison. He chooses security over selfhood, performance over principle, soothing over structure. And in doing so, he becomes exactly what she didn't know she feared. A man she can't feel, not because he's cold, but because there's nothing solid to push against. That's the torment of the pleaser. He believes emotional generosity will earn him love. But what it often earns is distance. Because when a man pours everything out and nothing holds it in place, he becomes a container with no shape, impossible to trust, even when full. But not every man gives too much. Some give nothing, not because they're cold, but because warmth feels dangerous. Next is the man who hides behind logic and control, the strategist. He doesn't chase. He doesn't panic. He doesn't spiral after silence. He stays composed. At least, that's the story he tells himself. The strategist is calm on the outside, stoic, observant, detached. He's the man who's always in control, never overreacts, never begs, never falls apart when she does. And that's exactly how he wants it to look. Controlled, rational, above it all. But control is not the absence of fear. It's the structure built around it. Because what the strategist really fears isn't loss. It's chaos, unscheduled emotion, uncontrollable affection, the kind of closeness that floods the body before the mind can explain it. So he doesn't allow it. He monitors it. Every interaction becomes a pattern. Every moment of warmth gets filed as signal. Every withdrawal becomes data. He studies her, not to understand her, but to defend against her. Because deep down, he doesn't trust what love will do to him. He's seen what it does to other men, how they collapse, how they rage, how they become something pathetic once they care too much. And he swore he'd never be that. So he built the opposite. He made love into a system, a code of conduct, a game with pieces that only move when he allows them. But here's the truth behind the strategist's mask. He is not wise. He is not peaceful. He is frightened. Frightened of being fully known. Frightened of what might come up if he ever stopped analyzing. Frightened that deep beneath the systems and insight and restraint, there is something unworthy. And she might see it before he can stop her. So he stays one step ahead. He frames every conversation. He redirects every confrontation. He creates a narrative in which he is never the one exposed. And for a while, it works. Women are drawn to the stillness. They sense the confidence, the restraint, the structure, but something is missing. And they feel it before they can name it, because the strategist is present in every moment. except his own. He's there in body, but not in surrender, not in risk, not in awe, because awe can't be strategized. It can only be lived, and that's where the connection begins to rot. She opens, he calculates. She shares, he interprets, she tests. He outmaneuvers, not cruelly, quietly, with a half smile, with intellectual patience, with the distance of a man who thinks he's being strong because he refuses to feel. But she doesn't want perfection. She wants presence. Not a man who can fix her pain. A man who isn't afraid of touching his own. And the strategist, he hasn't touched his in years. Marcus Aurelius said to master the mind and accept what we cannot control. But the strategist twisted that wisdom. He didn't learn acceptance. He learned avoidance. He made love conditional. He turned softness into a liability. He built an identity where logic is God and vulnerability is failure. And in doing so, he didn't just lose women. He lost the one thing that makes intimacy real: emotional risk. Because you can't outthink your way into being felt. You can only surrender. But he doesn't know how, or more accurately, he doesn't believe it's safe. Because when he was younger, he did open, he did feel, and someone used it, or mocked it, or left when he was finally unguarded. And that moment became law. Never let them see you weak. Never want someone more than they want you. Never show your cards unless you already know the outcome. These aren't insights, they're trauma in disguise. Strategy is self-protection, and it isolates him, not physically, emotionally, because the woman can still be in the room, still in the bed, still wearing his shirt, but she's already gone, because there's nothing real to touch. The strategist made sure of that. He layered his heart in abstraction. He replaced confession with clarity. He replaced depth with distance, and now he's wondering why she pulled away. He'll tell himself she couldn't handle his directness, or she wanted someone more expressive, or she was threatened by his emotional discipline. But the truth is, she wanted to meet him, and he never showed up, because all she ever met was the guard he trained to stand in his place. That's the downfall of the strategist. He believes that feeling less makes him more powerful, but it only makes him unknowable, and what can't be known can't be loved. But not every man hides behind logic. Some hide behind their past, not to control others, but to explain why they've given up. That man doesn't build a fortress, he builds a wound. The next archetype is the broken one. He doesn't look angry, he looks tired, calm, measured, like someone who's been through too much to pretend anymore. You won't find him begging, you won't find him chasing. He speaks slowly, if at all, because he's seen what happens when you give too much of yourself to love. And now he's done. Or so he tells himself. He's not a villain. He's not loud. He's not manipulative. He's haunted. Every glance, every silence, every smile carries a memory he hasn't dealt with, but has learned how to carry like a shield. She sees him and senses the depth, the gravity, the weight of something ancient and bruised. And it pulls her in, because at first it feels like wisdom. He seems like the man who knows women, knows heartbreak, knows what matters. But what she doesn't realize is that he only knows one thing: how to lose. Because that's where he built his identity, not in strength, but in survival. And survival feels noble until you realize it's also a cage. The broken one doesn't trust love. He mourns it, not as a phase, as a worldview. She'll tell him she cares. He'll smile politely. She'll ask what he's thinking. He'll say nothing. Because if he speaks honestly, the mask will crack. And the pain underneath isn't poetic. It's feral, embarrassing, raw in a way that scares even him. So he lets her believe he's healed, enlightened, above it all. But he's not above anything. He's just underneath everything he's never said out loud. because at some point in his life, he made a vow. Never again. Never again would he hand over the raw parts. Never again would he be fully seen. Never again would he become someone's soft landing, only to be left harder than before. And that vow didn't make him strong. It made him immovable. Nietzsche once said, "There is always some madness in love, but there is also always some reason in madness." But the broken one stopped listening to the madness. He let pain replace instinct, and now he mistakes bitterness for reason. He's not cold, he's grieving, not a person, but his own belief that he was ever lovable as he is. He thinks no one sees him, but that's not the problem. The real problem is that he refuses to be seen unless he can control the story, and the story is always the same. She left, she changed. She said one thing and did another. There's always a she, but there's never a me. Never a moment where he lets go of the frame and says the one sentence that might save him: "I never let myself be chosen." Because you can't be chosen while performing survival. You can't be loved while weaponizing grief. But that's what he's doing. He tells stories of the past with a calm, reflective tone. But it's not processing. It's proof. Proof that he was once good, that he gave enough, that she just didn't see it. And by holding on to that version of himself, he avoids the far more painful question, what if I was seen and still not kept? That's the trauma he never names. Not that she hurt him, but that she saw the real him and walked away anyway, so now he doesn't risk that again. Instead, he attracts women who want to save him, who confuse sadness with depth, who think stillness means presence. But they don't realize he's not still, he's stuck. Frozen in a moment he never outgrew, and they stay until they realize he can't meet them, not because he's cruel, but because he's unavailable in the one way that matters. He doesn't believe it's possible anymore. Possible to be loved, possible to be kept, possible to be real and not regret it. And the moment they sense that, they leave. And he adds them to the story. Another woman who couldn't handle his truth. Another heart that didn't know what to do with a man like him. But what they couldn't handle wasn't his depth. It was his refusal to rise from it. Because grief can build a home. But it's not a place you're meant to live. It's a passage, a rite, a storm. But the broken one never walked out of the storm. He turned it into scripture. Now pain is his credibility. Loss is his clarity. And isolation is his sanctuary. But nothing grows there. Not trust, not connection, not self-respect. Because when a man uses sadness as a safeguard, he becomes emotionally invulnerable, but relationally useless. She can cry in front of him, but she'll never feel held. Because his stillness isn't strength, it's distance. And distance cannot contain emotion. It can only observe it. So eventually, she gives up, she stops reaching, and when she leaves, he barely reacts. Because that's his final defense. The performance of not caring, but beneath the surface, he's shattered. Not because he lost her, but because he can now confirm his favorite lie. That love always leaves. That's the tragedy of the broken one. He doesn't fear love. He fears hope. Because hope would mean trying again. And trying again would mean facing the possibility that his pain is not who he is. But not every man mourns. Some never grieve at all. Some reject the loss so completely. They turn their need for love into a demand. And when love doesn't obey, they punish. The next archetype is the punisher. He doesn't yell. He doesn't rage. He doesn't raise his fist or voice. He's too refined for that. His violence is colder, sharper, a matter of tone, not force. He says things like, "She's just like the rest. Modern women don't deserve commitment. I tried being good, didn't work." He thinks he's being honest. But honesty isn't the point. Superiority is, because the Punisher isn't trying to connect. He's trying to win, not win her over, but win against her. She's no longer a person. She's a placeholder, a living symbol of every woman who ignored, cheated, betrayed, belittled, or left him. He doesn't punish her. He punishes the idea of her. And he uses emotional distance as a weapon. He withholds. He tests. He makes her prove what she already offered freely. But what looks like strength is just the fear of being wrong. Because if he lets love in, if he lets her close, and she doesn't betray him, then he has to reckon with a terrifying possibility. Maybe it wasn't all their fault. Maybe he contributed. Maybe he's not the victim, but he can't hold that thought. It would collapse his identity, because the Punisher was born the moment the boy in him said, "I'll never be humiliated again." And that vow became gospel. Freud wrote, "Unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways." This is what he meant, not the scream, but the strategy. The way a man adapts to betrayal, not by healing, but by holding it like ammunition. He doesn't cry. He calculates. He studies red flags. He builds checklists. He trades vulnerability for vigilance. And every time a woman leans in, he leans back just enough to maintain power. He'll open up, but only partially. He'll show you a wound, but make sure you know it doesn't hurt anymore. He'll offer presence dash, but only if you prove you're worth the cost. Because he's not trying to be chosen. He's trying to stay in control. She says she's loyal. He doubts it. She says she's different. He tests it. She gives him affection. He watches for how long it lasts. And that isn't discernment. It's punishment. He's not protecting himself. He's making her pay, not directly, but emotionally. She starts to feel like she's always on trial, always trying to measure up to a woman who never existed, but somehow already failed him. And when she finally breaks, when she withdraws, stops trying, pulls away, he calls it confirmation. See, they always leave. She couldn't handle a real man. They say they want honesty, but they never do. What he means is, they couldn't survive me. But that's not masculinity. That's pain with a God complex. He walks through life convinced that his suffering gave him clarity, but it didn't. It gave him a reason to stop listening. Because if he admits she might be real, then he has to admit she might be right, and that would collapse the whole defense. The Punisher is not a narcissist. He's not evil. He's tired. Tired of giving and losing. Tired of trying and being outshined. Tired of putting his heart on the line and watching someone walk away as if it was never there at all. And he didn't know how to grieve that. So instead, he chose judgment. Judgment doesn't cry. Judgment doesn't hope. Judgment doesn't get abandoned. It just watches, evaluates, keeps score. And that's the role he now plays. The emotionally detached truth teller. The realist. The man who knows too much to fall again. But knowing too much is just another way of saying, I've stopped learning. Because you can't learn from someone you've already decided is beneath you. And that's the secret he'll never say out loud. He doesn't believe in love anymore. He believes in leverage. She gives. He withholds. She opens. He flinches. She offers her trust. He pockets it like evidence, and she feels it. Even if she doesn't understand it, she feels the double standard, the invisible contract, the sense that her every move is being logged. For a trial she never agreed to attend. And eventually it kills the connection, not with an argument, not with betrayal, but with exhaustion, because punishment doesn't look like violence. It looks like silence, withholding, passive control. And when she finally says she's done, he doesn't react. He just adds her to the story. Another woman who couldn't meet the standard. Another lie that proved itself. Another chapter in the book he keeps writing called, "They Never Deserved Me Anyway." That's the punishment he never sees. Not the pain he gives, but the intimacy he loses. Because when a man builds his identity on being right about women, he can't afford to be loved by one. But not every man closes his heart to protect himself. Some never had the heart to begin with. Not because they were broken, but because they were hollow. The next archetype is the ghost. He doesn't avoid intimacy because he fears women. He avoids it because he doesn't know if he exists. That's the paradox of the ghost. He craves connection, but fears what it might reveal. Because unlike the Punisher, he's not angry. And unlike the Mirrorwalker, he doesn't need your gaze to survive. What he needs is distance, not physical, psychological, emotional. He'll say all the right things. He'll show up on time. He'll listen carefully, but he won't arrive. His body is there. His words are there, but he is not. There's a weightlessness to him, a strange, unshakable absence. He's attentive, but unreadable, affectionate, but unreachable. You talk to him, and something inside you tightens, because you feel like you're trying to connect with someone behind glass. Every time you try to get closer, he shifts. He doesn't resist. He diffuses. You ask what he's feeling. He says he's fine. You ask where he's going. He says, "I'm just figuring things out." But figuring things out isn't a phase. It's a fortress. Because to name something is to become responsible for it. And he's not ready to carry that. He's not ready to be known, because deep down, he fears there's nothing there to know. Heidegger once wrote, "Man is not the lord of beings, he is the shepherd of being." The ghost doesn't know how to shepherd anything, because he's never been taught to exist inwardly. He lives by deflection, by retreat, by hovering just above his own depth. He'll give you stories from his past, but never the truth beneath them. He'll talk about exes, but not his longing. He'll admit his mistakes, but never his shame. He can confess without collapsing, but he can't inhabit what he's said. Because inhabiting the truth means you might stay, and if you stay, you might see the hollowness he's spent a lifetime concealing. The ghost doesn't disappear after heartbreak. He disappears the moment someone gets too close to naming him. And here's the part no one talks about. He doesn't ghost to hurt you. He ghosts to preserve the illusion that he could have been enough if only he'd stayed. Because if he stays and fails, if he stays and still isn't chosen, if he stays and is seen and still not loved, then there's nowhere left to hide. That's the fear he lives inside. So he escapes first, quietly, elegantly, spiritually. He keeps conversations abstract. He prefers big questions to real answers. He lets you speak more than he does, because his safest form of intimacy is being the background character in your story. He supports, he observes, he uplifts. But when you turn to face him, when you say, "Tell me what you need," he pulls back, not violently, just enough to remind you that he was never yours to hold. He lives in delay, not commitment, not resistance, delay. He tells himself, "I just need more time." But the truth is, he needs more distance, because every step closer is a step toward collapse. Not because he's hiding something bad, but because he's hiding nothing. That's what he can't articulate. Not that he's wounded, but that he's undefined. He isn't afraid of being abandoned. He's afraid of being understood, because understanding comes with gravity, and gravity comes with choice. To be understood is to stand still long enough to be held, and he doesn't know how to stand still. He learned early on that to survive is to adapt, to change, to mirror, to avoid becoming a burden. And so that's what he became, absent yet accommodating. He doesn't argue, he doesn't interrupt, he doesn't demand, he just leaves. Sometimes physically, sometimes psychologically, but he's always preparing for an exit. Not because he doesn't care, but because caring fully would force him to exist fully. And he's not ready for that. You'll notice this man in the moments that should feel warm, but instead feel drained. He makes you feel like you're the only one in the room. But later, you'll wonder if you imagined the connection. He looks at you with depth, but it's the depth of an open window, not a rooted soul. And when it ends, if it ends, he doesn't rage or explain. He disappears the way he arrived, quietly, kindly, as if he was never there at all. That's the cruelty of the ghost. He doesn't steal your heart. He steals your memory. You look back and realize you were building a bond with a man who refused to exist in it. But not every man avoids closeness. Some seek it desperately, not to hide, but to heal. That's where we go next. The final archetype, the orphan. He doesn't rage. He doesn't disappear. He doesn't contort himself into a mirror or mask. He simply waits to be left. That's the orphan's burden. He enters every connection with a clock ticking quietly in his chest. He's not trying to be chosen. He's preparing for the moment he's not. And because he knows it's coming, he never fully arrives. There's a tenderness to him, but it's guarded. Earnest, but edged with fear. He smiles like someone who's been let down just enough times to no longer expect the smile to be returned. He listens. He cares. But you can feel it. His presence comes with an apology. Like every word he offers is him asking, "Can I stay a little longer?" He doesn't need validation. He needs permission. And that's what makes him disappear. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Each time you lean closer, he leans in too, but not without grief, because he knows what comes next. He's tasted it before, the shift, the slow emotional retreat of someone who once said, "I'm not going anywhere." But they did, and so will you. That's what he believes. He doesn't just fear abandonment, he trusts it. Kierkegaard once said, "The greatest hazard of all, to be oneself." For the orphan, being himself never brought safety. It brought silence, withdrawal, or replacement. So he built his identity not from essence, but from adaptability. He learned to manage the emotional climate of those around him, to soften what made others pull away, to offer what made them stay, but nothing ever stayed. Not because he was broken, but because no one ever showed him that love can remain without needing to be earned. That's the wound he carries, the belief that presence must be purchased with performance, apology, perfection. And when it's not enough, he doesn't get angry, he gets smaller. Not because he lacks strength, but because somewhere in him there's a boy who still believes. That being less is what makes you lovable. He is the most intimate of all the archetypes, and the most haunted, because every time you say, "I'm here," he hears, "Not for long." Every kindness feels conditional. Every gaze feels temporary. And every act of love, instead of grounding him, triggers the countdown. He becomes the architect of his own loss. Not because he wants to sabotage love, but because he wants control over when it disappears. If it ends by his hands, at least he wasn't abandoned. At least he wasn't surprised. This is the logic of the orphan. Better to self-destruct than be discarded. So he pulls away slowly, with warmth, with grace. You won't even know it's happening. He's still thoughtful, still affectionate, but underneath it all, he's already rehearsing your absence. He doesn't test you, he tests himself. Every time you respond with love, he quietly asks, "Do I deserve this?" And every time he doubts it, a piece of him detaches. He starts to withhold the deeper things. Not out of manipulation, but out of mourning, because to speak the full truth of who he is would mean risking the real him being left behind. And that is the most terrifying scenario of all. Not being left, but being seen and then left, because then the lie dies. The lie that says, they didn't leave me. They left who I pretended to be. No, they left you. That's the nightmare the orphan cannot endure, so he withholds it. He keeps his deepest pain sacred, not out of pride, but protection. And yet paradoxically, this withholding becomes the very thing that sabotages the closeness he craves. You feel it most in the quiet moments, when things are going well, when you're laughing, when you're resting, when it's calm. That's when he starts to slip, because peace doesn't soothe him, it alarms him. Something must be wrong. You're too close, he's too seen, and so he pulls back. He distances. He waits for the storm he believes is coming, and if it doesn't come, he'll create one, because chaos is easier than the unknown. Pain is familiar, but unpredictable love, that's unbearable. He doesn't need you to fix him. He needs to feel that his worth isn't on trial, that you're not tracking his usefulness, that your affection isn't tied to his performance, that your warmth won't vanish the moment he falters. But he can't believe it. Not yet. Because in his world, love is a loan with terms, and if he stops earning it, the debt comes due. So what does he do? He overgives. He over-apologizes. He anticipates needs before you feel them, not to connect, but to delay loss. And eventually, he becomes exhausted by the very love he longed for, because it's not really love he's receiving. It's a performance he's sustaining, and in time, he begins to resent the woman who stays, not because she's done anything wrong, but because her presence makes his fear harder to ignore. Every day she doesn't leave feels like another test he's not sure he passed, until finally, something inside him folds, and he leaves, not because she wasn't enough, but because he decided before she could that he wasn't. That's the grief of the orphan. He never asks for love. He just hopes it survives him. But when you step back, when you trace the collapse that echoes through every archetype, you begin to see the pattern. The Mirrorwalker was never loved, only reflected. The pleaser was never wanted, only needed. The strategist was never trusted, only tolerated. The broken one was never chosen, only mourned. The punisher was never empowered, only avoided. The ghost was never abandoned, he just never arrived. And the orphan was never left, he just never stayed. Each man built his identity as a defense against the moment he feared most, and in doing so, he guaranteed it. This wasn't about women, this was about the unconscious agreements made in silence, the quiet contracts where fear offers safety in exchange for self. So the question was never, why didn't she stay? It was always, why didn't you? Why didn't you stay present when connection asked for shape? Why didn't you stay rooted when conflict asked for direction? Why didn't you stay real when fantasy offered applause? Why didn't you stay you